Hey everyone, I'm Jackie Taylor, Associate Pastor at Journey Church, and I'm here with Michael DuVal, Lead Pastor at Journey Church, and we're going behind the scenes of our latest series, Let's Get Real. So I have looked over the messages and I had a couple follow-up questions. So, for our folks who may not know you, as well as I have the privilege of knowing you, truly, I mean, you wouldn't say this, but truly, you have a brilliant mind, right? You have a doctorate in like neuroscience or something like just ridiculous, right? And one day we were having this theological discussion, and your answer to me was, "Oh, well, you need to read Pannenberg," which is this dude's name. So I do, and it just, I can't describe it other than it broke my brain, right? It was hard. And so your first message in this series was, I'm confused. So with your brilliant mind, I wonder...
And Pannenberg confused you.
Oh, for sure. I'm like, I can't. But I'm just curious, what in your studies or in life have you found confusing?
The academic side, there are some challenging things. What I find more confusing in life are choices people make that are self-destructive and hurtful, not only to them, but to other people. And the question behind that is, why do we do that? And there is in all of us this tendency to do things that harm ourselves. And the Bible refers to that as sin. And so, in one sense, I'm confused by it because loving, caring people end up making unloving, uncaring choices. I think that's what confuses me more, is how we find ourselves being so detrimental to ourselves and other people. That's how I'd respond to that.
Okay. All right. So also in that message, you said that people have the tendency to fall into the temptation of believing that you're the one that's right and everyone else is wrong.
That each of us do that, yes.
Yes, each of us do that. And so I wonder if you could think of a time where this was true of you. And so where you thought you were right, everyone else is wrong, but as it happens, right, you were the one that was wrong.
Oh, this happens a lot.
Really?
Oh, yeah, this happens a lot.
Oh, this is fantastic.
Because of the insecurities that I struggled with a lot early in life, and then continue to some degree, I was at a place, and still am sometimes, where I think I need to know everything because it gives me a sense of control. And knowledge is power in one sense. And so I want to know things, and I read a lot, try to learn a lot, so that people won't think that I'm insecure or don't know what I'm talking about. So when I really don't know what I'm talking about is when I tend to make things...
Like it sounded good. I don't know if it's true or not, but it sounded good.
Yeah.
It sounds right.
Yeah. So I will say things like that. And a lot of times when it comes out, I'll say, oh, that sounded pretty good. But other times I'll know, that's not true. So I do that on occasion.
Yeah. How do you stop doing that? Right? Like, because I know I have that tendency as well. So how do you stop that?
I can't say that I just stop it cold turkey. I can say I do it less the more I find my identity in Jesus. Is when I find that I am accepted by God with all my faults and all my imperfections, then I don't have to put on a show and pretend to be something I'm not and try to come up with some answers to make people think I'm smarter than I am.
Okay. I like it. Okay.
And you question whether I'm smart anyway, but we'll go with that.
Well. Okay. You mentioned if a friend gives life-giving correction, right? As someone who generally avoids conflict, but also seeks to live a God-honoring life. How do I give loving, life-giving correction to a friend in a way that doesn't harm or hurt them?
Several things to unpack as you shared that question. First is to be clear that the reason you're offering this input, this feedback, this correction is because you truly love them and you want what's best for them and not because you want to change them. So I think the first is to check on the motivation, okay? Second thing to do is to ask them if they're open to you sharing your thoughts, your input. I try to not use the word feedback because people often assume that means something negative, but just say, I've been thinking of something. I'm curious if you would be open to my sharing it. So you're getting their permission. So if the motivation is love, if you're getting their permission before you share. And then I think the third thing you said is without hurting or harming them. I don't think that's within your control. If people feel hurt, they feel hurt. And sometimes we need to feel hurt if people lovingly offer us correction because the Holy Spirit convicts us of that. But if our motivation is right, if we've asked their permission, if we're sharing with them truth that in the long run can help them, there may be some short-term hurt. And so I think knowing that, it can help you to move forward, but the fear of conflict comes from a lack of love.
So you just have to think, short-term hurt, but long-term help.
That sounds really good. I wish I had said that.
Yeah. Okay. When you were prepping for your message on temptation, I know that you've reached out to our Facebook campus.
Yes.
And you asked them what things people are tempted by.
Yes.
And so I'm curious if there was anything that people said that surprised you, or if there was anything that people didn't say and that surprised you.
Yeah, it's more what people don't say.
Okay.
I think we all can learn something from what's not said as well as what is said. And when people talk about what tempts them the most, many times the deeper temptation is what we don't share. Because I talked about we keep those things secret to be ashamed, just to keep them secret. And it has to do with sexuality, the temptation toward sexual behavior outside of God's will. People tend not to want to talk about that. They talk about things like social media and money and stuff like that. But I think that's one of the things that we have to be aware of. So listen for what people don't say.
Okay. All right. What is your greatest temptation?
Well, I could say I just didn't.
And what does he not say? I'm just kidding.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. I think because my calling, my vocation is to be a pastor type person. I think one of my greatest temptations is not to be vulnerable and to share when I hurt or when I grieve. I think that would be one of my greatest temptations. Yeah. Not to be real. And the series is Let's Get Real.
Let's Get Real. Yeah.
So sometimes my temptation is not to be real.
Yeah. Okay. So what do you do in the moment when you are experiencing temptation?
Oh, I can answer this one.
The other ones you were just making up.
I'm making up, that's right. So growing up in a situation which was not the most emotionally healthy, I learned patterns of response, oftentimes to be loud or to be angry and to push away. The first thing I do when I'm tempted is to become aware of those recordings, those tapes that play in the back of my head, and to recognize that my first impulse is almost always the wrong one. So I've disciplined myself with the help of the Holy Spirit to recognize that my first thought is to do something that's selfish, sometimes self-protective, but in the long run is not the best, the most loving and caring thing. So the first thing I do is to try to listen to my first response and not do it.
Wow. Like, whatever you want to do it, don't do that.
For me.
Yeah.
Now, there are other people who know, it seems naturally, I don't think it's natural, it's learned, what the healthy, godly response is. I think I've developed some of that over time, but that's not my first impulse.
Okay. In the week of I'm tired, you talked about debilitating tiredness and depression. So I'm curious what words of advice you'd give to someone who's considering counseling, as in what do you look for when choosing a therapist?
Just want to talk and clarify our terms. We all get tired sometimes from physical things, healthy activities, but we're talking specifically about tiredness that's leading to a type of burnout that's debilitating in the sense that it's disruptive and harmful to relationships. Because I want to clarify what we're talking about. That being the case, what do I look for in a counselor? Well, there are a couple of things. There are certain certifications that indicate that people have had a certain degree of training, education, experience. And one of the things that I often look for is the person, if they're certified by AAMFT, American Association of Marriage and Family Therapists. Those folks tend to have, from my perception, a more experience and a higher skill level. And I would look for that. So look at least for some credentialing, I think is important. I think it would be of help to talk with others who have been to counseling before and find out from them who has been beneficial to them. I think it's important to recognize that it's hard to say this is the best counselor for you because different people respond to different types of therapists. And so one may try a counselor and say, well, that doesn't work for me, and then they give up on counseling. I would really encourage not that. If one doesn't seem to be the best fit, then seek out someone else. I think you have to decide whether you want a male or a female therapist. Depending on your issue, I think that makes some difference.
So unplanned question. How do you break up?
All of these are unplanned to me.
How do you break up with your therapist, right? Like you give it a good try, but you're like, we're not connecting in the way that you would hope.
Well, when one goes to a therapist, one wants to be open and vulnerable and share honestly, and one simply says that. Thank you for the input you've given me. I found some of these things to be helpful, but I'm not finding this to be the most beneficial for me, and I'm going to be seeking someone else I can have a conversation with. If they're professional, they'll say, what's best for you? And if I'm not the best therapist, I hope you'll find someone who is.
Okay.
Yeah, just direct.
Some of us are going to need therapy to go to therapy to break up with our original therapist, so that's encouraging. Have you ever felt burnout?
I cannot say that I've ever felt burnout. There have been some times I've been tired, times I've been exhausted, but I do practice a reasonable amount of self-care. I know when I need to be alone, to engage in some solitude. I know when I need some rest. I am a driven person, as you know. And people who are type A, high octane folks can move toward burnout, but it comes from self-awareness. And so I can't say that I've ever burned out.
Okay. And that just comes from that self-care, maintaining and being aware of.
It has to do with awareness, that's right. I think it's also of value to surround oneself with people who care about you, who can say, I'm seeing in you that you're perhaps too tired, and so want you to take some time off. So I think having some accountability partners helps with that.
Yeah. Like a management team who says, Michael, you're working too many hours.
Or a wife.
Or a wife. Yeah, that helps. That helps. So then what is the most tired you've ever felt in your life? I hear stories, especially of like new parents, and I have 2 little ones. They put salt in their coffee or orange juice in their cereal. Have you ever experienced anything like that, or do you remember a time in your life or a season where you just felt more tired or exhausted than others?
Well, when we had the children, there was a lack of sleep. The one most tired I can remember is I used to be a prison chaplain, and there was a crisis going on at the prison. And I went in and, I was there overnight. I guess I was there 36 hours. It was a long stretch. Wow. Being there and helping with some things. And what I remember is driving back home after being up all night and however long it was, and driving through a red light and almost being hit and not realize that I had driven through a red light, but when the screaming car came and just missed me.
Wow.
So I would probably say that was one of the most tired I've ever been, not to even realize where I was when I was driving home.
Wow.
Don't do that.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. I think this was from the week of shame. I'm ashamed.
Okay.
Have you ever faked it spiritually?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Do you want anything else? That was a yes or no question.
Yeah, describe a time then when you have done that.
When I have faked it spiritually?
Yeah.
Or felt ashamed? Because for me, they're a little bit different.
I think faked it spiritually, because we're going to go to shame just a little bit more.
Okay. When is a time that I have faked it spiritually? Okay, I think there are 2 ways to approach this. One has to do, was I trying to fake it with God? Or was I trying to fake it with other people so that they would think I was more holy than I am? In terms of trying to fake it with God, I don't think that I've done a lot of that. I have a sense of the presence of God in such a way that I don't buy into the belief that I can fake God out.
Right.
So I'm going to move that one off the table.
Okay.
In terms of faking being spiritual with other people, that's a temptation, to go back to your question, of pastor type people. And I think probably earlier in my life, I would try to particularly think that, I would read the Bible, I would pray, and I would, like, if I'm reading the Bible through a year or something like that, I would say, yeah, I'm doing great, but I'd be, so far behind and things like that. And so I would have to make it up. So, those type of things. But most of that has to do with insecurity. And I think faking it spiritually in front of others is because there's not this sense that I'm living up to their expectations, which in of itself is unhealthy. And it goes back to what I said earlier about not wanting to be vulnerable or open.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Have you ever experienced a deep sense of shame? And if so, like how old, like what life stage, and what did you do with that? How did you learn to let that go?
Something immediately comes to my mind.
Okay.
I love our children with abandon. I think most people know this.
I know where this is going. I know this story.
So, love our children with abandon. Yeah, I just do.
Is this Allison in the stairs?
No, this is David in the stairs. You got the wrong child.
Okay.
So David is in the little walker.
Oh, yes.
However old that is, 18 months or so.
Yep.
And I had gone down in the basement and to get something and came back up, didn't notice him, and I did not close the door. And then I heard this noise, and I knew our son was careening down the steps into the basement.
Yeah.
I'm pretty quick.
Yeah.
I flew across the house, and I hit the steps once from the main floor down to the basement, And I grabbed him up in my arms, and I just held him, and I just wept uncontrollably. I was so ashamed that I'd done that. Yeah, it's one of those things I'll just, I'm never going to get over that one.
Yeah, I mean, that just hurts to,
Yes.
to even hear that.
Saw him bounce off the cement.
God. Yeah.
Yeah.
So how do you let that go? I mean, just hearing that, like my empathy, I mean, I feel that. And so having experienced that firsthand, how do you like not let that keep you awake at night? And what do you do with that?
It's the same thing that's back here.
Yeah.
It will play over and over again in the back of my mind. And I know it is the evil one who is trying to use that so that I will be self-destructive or do things that are harmful. And it comes from a right relationship with God of saying, God has forgiven me. That was a terrible mistake. I'm never making that mistake again. But holding on to it is to give it power over me. So it's hard. I try not to let it overwhelm me. But recognizing that I've learned from it and I've asked God to forgive me and I've continued to love my son with passion, that's the best you can do. Just don't give it control over my life.
Yeah. David, if you're watching, we love you. We're so glad you're okay. Okay, so why do you think humans struggle so much with selfishness?
I can give you the bigger theological perspective.
Oh gosh, is this from
Ponnenberg?
I have to review my notes.
Similar to that is we human beings experience limitedness or finitude. God is infinite, God is unlimited. And with our finitude, our limitedness, we realize how small we are, how insignificant we are. And that leads to a sense of anxiety and insecurity. And the way we try to combat that anxiety and insecurity is to puff ourselves up, to focus on ourselves. It goes back to Adam and Eve. They wanted to be like God.
Right.
And so I think that selfishness comes from our finitude, from our not feeling like we are good enough. And that's what leads then to sin and selfishness.
All right. So let's get real.
Okay?
Did you just make up the word finitude?
I did not. Though I have made up words before.
Oh my. Like in a message?
Just in conversations. And people
nice.
will say, that's not a word. And I'll say, yeah, it is. I just said it. And we have to recognize that the English language has new words that are continually developing. Right. And so I just choose to start them.
Yeah, I'll submit it to Webster later.
I don't have to. It's my word.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
It's just a way to communicate.
Okay. How can we adopt a selfless attitude in our culture that is tremendously self-seeking?
How can we do that?
Yes. So everyone around us, the temptation, right, like is to kind of fall in line with everything we see and do, around us, right? And it's so countercultural right now because we're living in a time where people,
to be selfless.
Yeah.
Okay. There's a scripture, it's Galatians 2:20, it's important to me, that talks about, I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but it's Christ who lives in me. I think we begin individually by trying to conquer the selfishness within ourselves. And that's an ongoing battle. But before we go out there and try to change the world or the culture, we need to begin with ourselves. The Bible talks about a little bit of leaven, and then it spreads through the whole dough. And so we begin with ourselves, and then within our spheres of influence, we have conversations openly about where we struggle with it, and then we build that community out to engage in more selfless service and caring and love. And then we continue to try to spread that. And then as a culture as a whole, there are political ramifications about this. As best we can tell in a Christ-like way, we vote for people who are less selfish and more selfless, and who put the good of others before themselves. We elect leaders, we get involved in community organizations, and we try to develop an ethic over time. But ultimately, it's God that can change the human heart by the moving of the Holy Spirit. But we begin by ourselves, and within our sphere of influence, we just spread it out. And that's the best we can do. We have to trust the rest of God.
Okay. So last question. It's a long one.
Long question, short answer.
Perhaps. Perhaps. Okay. So it seems ironic that we Americans or Western Christians or whatever,
Okay, because some of the people who are watching this may not be from the West, okay?
so we're consumed with happiness and personal fulfillment, and we choose selfishness to achieve that, but that actually has the opposite effect, leading us to feelings of emptiness and despair, yet remain resistant to living selflessly. What is that about?
Goes back to some of what we talked about earlier about our createdness, our finitude, our sense of limitations. We're trying to find meaning and purpose in life to become the persons God has created us to be. And we sometimes buy into the lie that our personal happiness is fulfilling God's purpose for our lives. But if we look at Jesus, he did not seek his personal happiness. He sought to be a conduit of the love of God the Father in a way that blessed other people. And then he found a deep joy in the midst of doing that. But happiness is a byproduct of faithful obedience. If it is the target, then we tend to get off the track in doing that. And so there's this thing in the Sermon on the Mount called the Beatitudes.
Yep.
Blessed he is, but as I recall, the Greek word is makarios, which literally means happy are those. And so happiness is found in having the attitude of Jesus, of self-giving love.
Okay. Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
I appreciate all of your time. I hope you've enjoyed this behind-the-scenes look at our Let's Get Real series. And if you haven't watched that, I encourage you to do that. You can check it out on our YouTube channel, Journey Church Roanoke. You can get inside access if you want to join our online Facebook campus. I urge you to do that. That's Journey Church Online. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks.